I'm gonna say that'll work.
Yes, it's just doing
All
it.
right.
Got it.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you for being with us today. Welcome to our book club.
I'm really excited to be here. It's been like a year.
I know. I remember last year when you and I were touching base and you were like, is the meeting coming up? And I was like, oh, 2021. I'm a planner.
I am too, so I appreciate it.
So that's why when things were going awry today, I was like, oh my goodness. I'm like, I am usually prepared and our link goes out at 10 and everything works and it's good to go. So thank you for your patience. Thanks for being here. Does anybody want to start with questions? I'm like, I have a list of them. I was super excited.
You can go, Brittany.
Okay, so what was your inspiration for this story?
So it was really mainly my relationship with my friends throughout my 20s. I had a close group from college and we all kind of spread out and our lives moved at different paces and it was tough and it was something I didn't prepare for. And my relationship with my girlfriends are some of the most important relationships in my life and complicated relationships in my life. And it's really scary and difficult to navigate as those relationships change. And as, all of our lives changed. My best friend got married at 23 and had kids. And then so she was in a way different place than I was. I was like out partying in New York City and we were just in such different places. And how do you maintain those relationships that are so important to you while, life is pulling you in opposite directions? And that was kind of the origin story for what the book is about. And then the rest is just horror fun.
What inspiration or what research, did you do while you were working on this book?
What research?
Mm-hmm.
There was a bit of character research and development, but the hotel is based off the Madonna Inn in California, which is this super gaudy, amazing hotel. I've never been, so it was kind of me living vicariously, looking at the pictures online. But other than that, it wasn't too research heavy, which is why I write fantastical fiction, because I'm not a super skilled researcher.
Can I ask a question, Brittany?
Please ask plenty.
Who are some of your horror authors that you maybe drew inspiration from or something?
Yeah, so Shirley Jackson is probably my favorite, and Hill House, I think, is my favorite horror novel of all time. So it was definitely a heavy Shirley Jackson influence. The Shining was another big influence. I know it's kind of boring to say Stephen King, but The Shining was a huge influence on this book. And I kind of joke that, it's part, Stephen King, Shirley Jackson, and then part Judy Blume, because the Judy Blume books that I read growing up were some of the books that touched on female friendship, where not a lot of other literature does. I think it's still there's more books now, but when I was growing up, it was really Judy Blume. And then Anne Patchett wrote a book called Truth and Beauty about her friendship with Lucy Greeley, and it's nonfiction, but it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, and it's about a very close female friendship. So it was kind of on both ends of the spectrum. On horror, it was Shirley Jackson and Stephen King, and then on the other end, it was Judy Blume and Anne Patchett.
Yeah, definitely got Stephen King's The Shining.
Yeah, creepy hotel, real original.
Right.
But
So I saw in an interview you wanted to be asked about the character development of Elise. So can you tell us more about her and her character development and all of that and your thoughts on her?
Yeah, I think it was interesting for me to see the reaction to some of the characters, because I think it was funny. I ran into my neighbor in the hallway and she's like, at first I hated all of the characters and then I wanted them to be okay. And it was interesting to me, I think, a lot of people are really hard on female characters who were just human and existing. Like none of the characters in my book, I mean, Julie a little bit, are like evil or conniving or manipulative. They're just a little bit lost and not quite there yet. And all right, my cat is, you're gonna get kicked out. Sorry, I'm being attacked.
Oh, I'm like, that head that popped up was the best.
She's just being evil.
Oh.
I'm gonna have to call my husband. She's attacking me.
He's attacking you? Oh my
Yeah,
God.
hold on one second.
Funny.
You're gonna get kicked out. I'll be right back.
That's the next subject of the next book. The
evil cat. Yeah, I was so excited. We have been planning this for a year.
Wow.
I'm so sorry. This is the second time she's done this to me while I've been on a Zoom.
Jealous, I guess.
But I think people tend to be pretty harsh on characters who they find flawed, especially female characters. And I think Elise is just clearly very lost and trying to figure out her way in the world. And I have a lot of compassion for Elise, and in many ways I relate to her and some of her being broke and having friends who aren't broke and friends who seem like they're in a better place than you. That was something I experienced and is a big part of Elise's character. So I have a lot of compassion for her. And it was interesting for me to see the reaction to her and people maybe not having as much compassion towards characters who don't have it together, who aren't bad people, who just haven't figured it out yet. So I think Elise is fascinating in that way, in my intention with her and how she's read by other people.
I'm curious, like, who of the book club people, who are your favorite characters or character?
I think I had a lot of.
Molly.
Yeah, Molly.
Mm-hmm.
She was just
I liked Molly too. I really
Yeah.
did.
so
It
outspoken. I thought she was
Right.
hilarious and
No
fantastic.
was so
Yeah.
funny. She was like me. She had like a dry,
Mm-hmm.
cynical. No, I'm not really cynical, but sensitive.
Yeah.
Right. And trying to like push Elise to ask Julie the questions. Like the whole time I was like, why aren't you just like asking her why she's binge eating raw meat? Like if it were your friend, like you think you would say something, I don't know, immediately. Red flag. But yeah, I liked Molly the best.
I was gonna say, Marilyn and I went to lunch once, and she watched me eat raw meat. She watched me
What?
eat steak
Yeah.
tartare in my defense, like it was meant to be raw.
Well, so Elise doesn't see Julie ever eating it until the end. She's just
Yeah,
eating meat
true.
now. It's
Right.
I think it's that slow, when you see somebody who you haven't seen for a long time and you know them from a certain context and now they're in a new context, projecting the person they were and not seeing the person they are. Like I met up with a friend after not hanging out for a few years and she was like, let's do tequila shots. And I was like, I don't do tequila shots anymore. Like I've graduated. Like I'm bed at 9, like I go to bed at 9:30. Like those days are behind me. But she kept wanting me to be somebody who I was. And I think that's part of the issue with this group of friends, where in order to maintain friendships throughout your life, you have to accept people for who they are at that point instead of holding on to who they were. And I think Elise and Julie really struggle with that, where they have such a close friendship, but they're not who they were, and they keep trying to force it. And I think if you're not ready to accept somebody has changed, you're going to do all sorts of mental gymnastics to justify in your head that they're the person you want them to be instead of who they are. But yeah, Elise definitely was dragging her feet and in denial for way too long about what was happening.
So if you came up with your friends because of your personal, like deal, like with what you and your friend group, how'd you come up with the monster, with the creature?
So I wanted a creature who feeds, because I think when you're in a relationship that's not working anymore, it feels draining. I didn't want to go vampire. So the creature is like technically based on a Wendigo, but I didn't want to lock myself into a certain mythology. And because the creature is more of a metaphor than it is like, I didn't want to create like a whole mythology around it or have it be like, this is what this is, because I thought it would take away a little bit from the messaging of the story. And sometimes you lose friends and they come back and they change, and you're never going to have answers as to what happened or who they are now. But the creature itself is based on a Wendigo, and they are basically like cannibalistic creatures who feed on people.
Okay.
That was cool though. Yeah.
The design, so there's a sculptor, I want to say his name is Javier Perez, but I'll have to check. And his sculptures, he has these like tree skeleton sculptures. And so that inspired me for more of the creature design. So that was fun to like look up those pictures and be able to kind of translate those into my own vision.
Yeah.
So
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that I didn't realize it was like a horror spooky book at first, and I was really excited when it started to get more paranormal. I just finished Cackle before, and I loved that book, like 5 stars. It's one of my favorites. So hopping into this one, I love like the spooky vibes. It's a perfect like October Halloween read.
Did you read Cackle before the return?
Yes, and I loved Cackle so much. So
they're different. They're very different.
They're really
books.
different. Yeah.
So and it's interesting because The Return I wrote as a horror novel, but like I think it got like put into like a horror thriller category, and I'm not really familiar with thrillers. So it's interesting to watch how like your books get placed because as soon as you put them out there, you don't have control. But yeah, I think with The Return, because it had like a missing girl, I think some people just saw, oh, it's a missing girl, it's a thriller, like a Gone Girl type thing. And then they'd get to the supernatural part and be like, huh? I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah.
I was wondering, like I guess Elise, I know this is like, I just analyze books as I read them.
No.
I mean, it's not probably the best thing, because when it's a completely paranormal, horror type thing, you can't make sense of, how can you make sense of things? But I was curious, like when Elise is in her hotel room, I mean, before you find anything out about Julie, and Julie hasn't really deteriorated, I guess, or disintegrated into what she is at the end. So earlier in the book, Lisa's seeing shadows, and then she's always thinking she's seeing something on her balcony, and is the door locked? The door's not locked, or the door's locked. The temperature, that's always kind of associated with dead people. When dead people are in many books and movies, what dead people are in a room, the temperature drops, that kind of thing. So I was thinking of The Sixth Sense, but anyway. So what's that meant to be? Is it like happening before, or is it Julie's impact, or is it the hotel's impact? I was a little puzzled.
It's Julie.
Okay.
She's traveling through the vents.
Okay.
And so when Elise is hearing noises or seeing things in her room or feeling a temperature change, it's Julie's presence. and towards the end, like the blood drips from the vent when they're in the movie, and at the end during the climax, Julie actually finally comes down out of the vent in the hotel. So yeah, the hotel itself is just like a little creepy, but anything that's supernatural or paranormal in the book is Julie's presence.
Okay.
Yeah, I liked that reveal at the end because I wasn't sure like what was going on with Elise, like in her head mentally and emotionally. And so I really liked at the end when you were like, yeah, there really was something there. And it was her best friend. It was a good reveal.
Who is the most challenging character to develop?
Probably Julie, just to get the right balance of having her feel a little off and nefarious, but also feel warm enough and normal enough to keep the group kind of on her side and maintain hope for long enough. It's tricky because she obviously needs to be different enough that things are creepy right off the bat, but not so different that the rest of the weekend can't like the rest of the book can't happen. So it's difficult to find that balance. And she is very clingy. Like her and Elise don't really have a healthy friendship. It's very close, but and they know each other really well, but it's a bit codependent and just not quite healthy. There's the jealousy aspect of Elise not being in a good place and her looking at Julie and thinking Julie's life is so great. So I think that dynamic, and Julie in particular, was probably the challenge. Whereas Molly and May felt very solid right off the bat. And Elise makes some bad decisions. So it was, and she kind of presents herself as the victim in the beginning, which I think is a lot of us. I know sometimes it takes me a while to accept my own responsibility in certain situations. But she kind of plays herself as the victim. And as the book goes on, you realize like, this is she's in a hell of her own making. But for the most part, the other characters in the book were pretty straightforward. It was Julie who required some finessing.
I could definitely see that. And then like when Julie's teeth were falling out, I don't know why, but like that got to me the most out of anything. I was like, ooh, teeth.
I don't know. I feel like if I was a friend of somebody and I'm sitting at a lunch table with them and their teeth start falling out and they just blow it off like it's.
I know, I'd be like, what?
I right there, I'd be like, there's something seriously wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a tough balance because I think in all horror books, your characters have to suspend disbelief.
Right.
But I think it was interesting releasing this book at the start of the pandemic and like seeing on a global scale people suspend disbelief because I think if we don't want to believe something, it's really amazing what we can do to stop ourselves from believing it. And so, I mean, part of it is it's fiction and it needs to function that way for the plot of the book. But I do think, it's the same when you're watching a haunted house horror movie and they move into this new house and like something happens and you're like, it's haunted, get out of the house. But like if you moved into a house and you just, put down the down payment and paid the movers and like you wouldn't, even if something happened, like you would let it go on for longer than you might think on the outside looking in, because it's different when you're in the situation. And I think for me, I'm somebody who's very paranoid and scared of everything. And so I'm always like, there's a noise, it's a monster. But if it actually, like if a monster actually crawled out from under my bed, I would still be in disbelief, because like, just because you worry about certain things, it doesn't prepare you for like you can entertain things, but the reality in the situation, I think, is always shocking and different. So that's tricky too, especially in horror, because you have to get the audience on board enough that they understand why the couple is staying in the haunted house, or why didn't they check out of the hotel. So that's just tricky. It's a horror issue for the genre.
Mhm. Definitely.
I think what I liked what you did with Julie the most was she was actually Julie. In so many of these horror stories, it's not actually who you think they are, but she just wasn't. So I really liked that balance of, yeah, she's not pretending. Like somebody did not inhabit her body. She just kind of came back from the dead because she had a purpose. So it was refreshing to see a different take on a missing person came back.
Yeah, thank you. And I think, that all goes back to like what I wanted to write the book about, which is like, if you have a friend and they change so much that the friendship can't survive anymore, there's still that person, which I think is, I sometimes describe The Return as a friendship breakup book, because I have friends who I've fallen out with and they're still like, I still know them, like they're still out in the world being themselves. And I think that's worse. That's a harder pill to swallow than if, they weren't around anymore, because they're there, you just can't access them and things will never go back to the way they were. And that's really painful. And I don't think talked about really.
I like that takeaway. I was going to ask what you hoped that kind of viewers, readers took away. And it seems like that might be the underlying message. And I think, have all experienced that.
Yeah, just being able to like let go of friendships and relationships that might be hard to let go of, that aren't working anymore. And I think it's tricky when it comes to talking about friendship, because I think it's not really given as much weight in general as other relationships. Like, there's a lot about relationships with your family or relationship with your significant other. But I think friendships can be just as nuanced and tricky as any other relationship. And it's kind of, especially for women, I think, where it's like, you either have to be, there's this pressure to be like all in, happy all the time, or best friends, like girl gang, or there's this like notion of cattiness where, if girls are, mean to each other, or, gossipy or vindictive. And I don't think it's that simple. I think there's a lot of stuff in between that kind of gets oversimplified in a lot of friendship content.
Well, and I think it even came out where like Elise was not as close to Molly and May, like she always felt like she had to be the first one there, so she wasn't left out. So the party didn't start without her, so that she kind of was like there to pick up or kick off or take care of, and all the compensating that she did to be a part of the group, because she and Julie were close, and then it was like Molly and May.
Yeah, I think in friendship groups that happens too, where it's like, well, are these two people closer than us? And there's that kind of insecurity that can feel kind of isolating and scary. Like, am I the least favorite? If I weren't here, would they even miss me? Like, they closer than we are? And that stuff is painful and real. And I hope that readers would feel, less. My hope for anything that I write is whoever reads it can feel maybe less alone in some way with whatever they're dealing with, or find something to relate to. So it was important for me to try and touch on aspects of friendship that I hadn't seen really portrayed widely in fiction.
So what made you pick the horror genre to write in?
I have a long, complicated relationship with horror, but I think it's fun. And it's enough of a leap away from real life that like I can work out real life issues through the genre and feel not like I'm in therapy for as long as it takes me to write something. And so it's a little bit of an emotional reprieve if I'm dealing with heavier subject matters or things that I'm trying to like work out for myself. It's a way to do it that's kind of fun and removed from reality. And also as a writer, there's inherent conflict and it just this raises the stakes a ton. So it's kind of like a cheat code because if to make everything way more tense and scary and the stakes way higher, life or death. And yeah, I love horror, so it kind of was a natural fit for me. I'm very easily scared, so like I watch horror movies. So sometimes I feel like a bit of a poser because I have such a low fear threshold, but I think oddly that makes horror easier to write because if I'm trying to think of something that's scary, everything scares me. So I have like a wide variety of things to pick from, like noises in the night or like, is my door locked? A lot of the horror in The Return is kind of anxiety, trusting yourself and stuff like that, which is something I experience a lot. So many reasons I go horror. But I think simplest answer is just fun.
Bailey, did you have any questions about Cackle? I know you finished that one and you loved it. So
No,
I was like,
no.
since we have her, if you had anything.
No, I don't.
Yeah, Cackle's slightly, I would say much lighter in tone than The Return.
Yeah, it's more of like a family spooky story, it seemed like,
Yeah.
besides like the bones coming out of the
Yeah,
punch.
yeah. I mean, it's still dark, but I think it's got a lot more humor. So it's different. I was interested to see like how they would. It's hard because you release your first book and then you're like, oh, now there's like expectations for.
No, I thought
like,
the second one was like really good. That's one of my favorites. And I loved her relationship with the little pet spider. I thought that was so cute.
Yeah, there's no cuddly spiders in The Return.
Right.
So was Cackle, how many books have you written? Was Cackle your first? Is this your second, The Return?
The Return was my first book. It came out March of 2020. And then Cackle is my second book. And it came out a few weeks ago. It came out October 5th.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about Cackle?
So Cackle is like a wry contemporary witch book about a woman who just turned 30 and was dumped by her longtime boyfriend. So she's kind of forced to move out of New York City, and she takes a teaching job upstate in this charming little town where she meets a mysterious woman who she befriends, and their friendship may or may not be a good thing.
Are you from New York? Is that the setting of your both books? Or I guess some New York, but
yeah.
Yeah.
So I was born and raised in New Jersey, and then I went to college in Boston. I lived in LA for a little bit, but I spent the last decade in New York. I lived in Brooklyn up until the pandemic, and now I live in Western New York. I live in the Rochester area. So yeah, a lot of my books take place in New York, New Jersey, that's what I'm most familiar with.
Are you working on anything currently?
Yeah, so my third book should be out next October. It's a lady werewolf book. So I'm in the middle of edits right now. So busy with that. And I have some short fiction that I'm working on too. I write short stories as well. I had, they're on my website. I have 2 short stories up. And those can be read right away for free. And then I have a story out on Audible called The Veil, which is an audio story. Yeah, so trying to keep busy. Keep
They
sane.
sound busy. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the werewolf book will be the next novel to come out. It's called Such Sharp Teeth.
Mm.
And that's kind of a
Who-
mix, I think, between like the intensity of the return and the humor of Cackle. It's kind of sits in between.
Okay. Who listened to this one versus reading it? I listened. Did you physically read it?
I listened to it.
Nice.
Yeah, same. I have to have the real thing.
I'm like, can we hold those up and take our screenshot really fast? I'm like, I love
So
that
do
you
I
both
have
have
to
physical
take-
books. I can do it if you
Okay,
want.
okay.
We'll just make sure
I
I'll
don't
count
know.
down. I'll just grab a screenshot of it.
Okay.
All right, you guys ready? 1, 2, 3. Perfect. And then what can you tell us about the cover design? Because I love the cover. Like
That
it
was-
stood out.
First nailed they showed me. They nailed it on the first try. So yeah, I mean, hot pink cover, like what more could you ask for?
Wait, so who does the cover? Like how does that work? I've never even thought about that, to be honest.
So the publisher pretty much has control over the cover. Authors get I used to work in publishing contracts a while back, so I know all the lingo. They give authors reasonable consultation, which makes sense because you could go back and forth forever. So they'll show you the cover, they'll ask you what you think, and then you can come back with feedback. But ultimately, authors, unless you're a self-published author, you don't have total control over what the cover looks like. They'll ask you at the beginning, they'll do cover consult, they'll say, what are you thinking? Do you have any comp covers that you're interested in or that you like? And then they'll go off and then they'll come back with the cover. So return, perfect first try. And Cackle, the original cover was a little bit different. It had like blood overflowing from a teacup, and it wasn't like a spider web teacup. And I said, it's a little intense for what the book is. So we changed it a little bit. So sometimes you can tweak, but for the return, it was just like, I'm very impressed. I mean, the whole art team at Berkeley is just incredibly talented. So I feel very fortunate.
Did you give them any guidance for that one when they started or have any parameters?
I don't tend to like photoreal images of people on the cover. I think that can skew people YA, like it might. So that's just a personal preference. I've seen, obviously there are covers out there that have people on them that I think are stunning. But I like a more minimal cover. But so I gave a little bit of input, but again, like they know what they're doing and I'm just like, it's not my area of expertise. So you kind of just have to let go and trust them. And, I don't want to be a backseat driver for something like I don't know anything about design or they're the experts. So you just have to kind of say like, this is generally what I like. And then trust that they'll come back with something amazing, which they always do.
It's good.
I see we have a countdown. It says we have 5 minutes left. Did you guys have any other questions?
No, I really enjoyed hearing the intent. It definitely gave the story more dimension.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got to come and talk to you guys.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
weird. The return feels so long ago for me. It's a little rusty because I haven't looked at it or read it in like 2 years. So
Yeah. Well,
Well, your
I'm
book-
reading, I was gonna say, I'm reading a book right now in which one of the characters is an author and whatever's happening is taken from her book and she doesn't even realize it. Now you can feel that. You're like, yeah, I guess things happened in the book that I don't remember because it was so long ago.
yeah, yeah. Like what?
Yeah.
And it's weird because by the time like now for me, the return is 2 books ago because I'm working on,
The third book.
yeah. And it's interesting because like now I'm doing interviews about Cackle, and it's like now Cackle is like 6 months ago for me. And I'm like in the middle of this other book. So you kind of have to like take a second and be like, wait, what was what was I thinking?
Yeah.
I agree with Beth, though. I love hearing kind of the intent with the friendships and things like that. Like, it's just a neat way to tackle complex things that we all feel and have been through, I think. And therapeutic, I was going to say, even as a reader reading it, because you're like, oh, I'm not alone. Like, people do change and friendships change. And sometimes you revisit somebody and it felt so good. And you felt so close. And then you meet them again and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
Why were we
there's, there's some disconnect here. What has happened? Time and space in life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if there are no other questions, I will let you all get back to your Sundays.
Perfect. I appreciate you.
Oh, of course. Yeah, this was so fun. And I will try and figure out a way to send you this recording.
Thank you.
And yeah, if any other questions pop up, you know where to find me on social.
Awesome.
So yeah, feel free to send me a message.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And thanks for keeping our calendar like a year out. That was
Oh
amazing.
yeah. As a Virgo and fellow planner, I appreciate it.
I was like, I'm an Aries, but like I plan,
Yeah.
like everything's pretty regimented. So and when I say we're doing something, I'm like, we are
We're
doing
doing
it.
it. Yep. You're
It
the
is
May.
happening.
You're the May of the group. Yeah.
I am the May. I'm like, it is happening. These are, yeah, this is what
Yeah.
I've set. These are the books we're reading. So
All right.
thank you.
Nice to meet you all. Have a
Nice
good
to
one.
meet you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank